On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Operaboxscore.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, this is America's talk radio show about opera. This is Opera Box Score. I'm George Cedarquist, joined this week by Oliver Camacho and Weston Williams. All right, we induct today's birthday boy into the OBS Hall of Fame. Now, let's see if you can guess who. Here's a hint. He's an American composer. He's an American composer. He's an American composer. Okay, enough of that. And in the 2-minute drill, Zubin Mehta unloads some of his shares of Tesla stock so that the Zubin Mehta Hall can have an endowment. I'm pretty sure I read that correctly. I know that if you're watching on TDO, I want you to subscribe to the full podcast to get the full show that we put out each and every week. Stitcher, Spotify, you click follow. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, smash that plus sign. It is that easy. You know what else is easy? Email us your hot takes at operaboxscore@gmail.com. You can send us a voice memo if you want to get your voice on the show. All you do is drop us a line or a voice memo. You get an OBS beer coaster. You get an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your hot takes. Oliver Camacho, the Australian Open is in the books.
I feel like we need a special sound effect here for Goat Alert. Rafael Nadal.
Oh, that sound effect.
2 sets down, came back to take the title in 5 sets, beating Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer for 21 total Grand Slams. And it was, I don't know if you guys watched it. It started at whatever 3:00 in the morning locally and didn't finish until like 8 a.m. So if you woke up, you saw like the last couple of games. I watched the whole thing on delay, and I just thought, okay, for sure, Rafael Nadal is he's going down,
I'm impressed you watched the whole thing.
I did. I watched the whole thing. And I mean, I watched it on delay, but I'm not a huge Nadal fan, but you have to give it to him, especially after being 2 sets down. And he's 35 years old. And I'm not kidding. He probably sweated 8 pounds of water. I'm not joking. minimum 8 pounds of water.
5 hours. I mean, that's comparable to an opera by
5 hours
someone.
and like 15 minutes or something like that. Yeah. And also congratulations to Ash Barty, who is the first Australian woman to win the Australian Open on her home turf since ... I don't know the stat, but it was a big weekend for a tournament that started in scandal. It ended with lots of great stories.
Weston on the beach.
What a way to close the Australian Open.
So weird. We're opening a new chapter here in Chicago.
Was that a joke? I'm sorry.
I have no idea what Weston is doing right now.
Oh, he says open, close. It's
it's an open, close joke. Yeah. You got it. You got it.
So dreadful. Yeah. There's a new chapter. There's a new book here in Chicago. Matt Aberfluss takes over as head coach of the Bears. Dallas listeners, you will know him, of course, as a linebackers coach for the Cowboys for a number of years in the 2010s. Here's what strikes me about Aberfluss, and this is the relationship to opera, is that from his very first coaching job to the Bears hire was 30 years. It was 30 years of work. And if that doesn't sound like the path that an opera director has to take or other people in the opera business, 30 years of nonstop work, I do not see a better parallel. We will see how he does running the insane Verismo opera that is the Chicago Bears. We're going to get to it right now. Let's talk some opera.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is OBS Hall of Famer, our enthusiastic yet humble salute to a distinguished opera artist who has gone above and beyond to contribute greatly, distinctively, and with grand significance to the art and honor of opera.
All right, we're doing another Hall of Fame, and if you were listening to George's hint earlier or have probably looked at the title of this episode, you might have figured it out. We're talking about one of my absolute favorite composers, Philip Glass. And wait, I hear some of our listeners trying to log off right now. Don't. My goal right now is to take this segment to get you to learn how to listen to Philip Glass, learn how to appreciate him, and also, while I'm at it, to get George to appreciate him as well, which I know might be a little easier said than done, but I'm going to do my best. So he was born when the day we're recording this, January 31st, is his 85th birthday. Can you believe that? That's wild to me. He was born January 31st in 1937, and I thought today was the perfect day to induct him into the Hall of Fame. So, first and foremost, Philip Glass is a divisive composer.
Republicans love him and Democrats hate him. That's what you mean?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, you either love Philip Glass or you love Stockhausen or you're a normal person. Those are your three options. I remember hearing a lot of his music in my youth. And I was honestly with a lot of the naysayers. His music is very repetitive, to say the least. If you break down the formula for Philip Glass, it's a couple of things. You've got the arpeggios, of course. Doodly 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 doodly. You have 3x2 polyrhythms, which the da 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 next to da 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 da. The rhythms are similar. The chords are similar. It's all tonal. You're not even getting any of like that late harmonic sort of like nastiness that you get with some of like, like a Berg or a Schrecker or something like that. And it can be very repetitive, especially if you're not used to listening to him. But he is very much the most important composer, probably a living composer at this point, and he has been for quite a while now. And so at the very least, I think you should try to give him a chance, George. Although I will say there's a quote by Philip Glass himself that it was in the documentary called Glass, A Portrait of Philip in 12 Parts, which is very fun. This is a direct quote by him in like the opening lines of the documentary. There's a lot of music in the world. You don't have to listen to mine. You have my blessing. Listen to something else. And really, I think that's really what makes Philip Glass interesting. Because if you listen to a lot of 20th century composers, your Boulez's, your Stockhausens, even some of like, your Schoenbergs and stuff, you have like this like animosity towards your audience sometimes, right? You're kind of, you want to compose something that's your own to the point where you begin to reject the audience. But Philip Glass is not really like that. The reason he composes like that, the arpeggios and the polyrhythms, is because he genuinely wants to compose that way. If you read anything by him, like his autobiography, or if you watch interviews, it's very clear that that's just like what he likes and what he's interested in. So I think it's very important, if you're trying to get into Philip Glass or trying to understand Philip Glass, to know a little bit of his background. He was born in 1937. He was from a family of immigrants, I believe, Lithuanian Jewish immigrants. As a matter of fact, his parents were had a little program going where Holocaust survivors and refugees would come into their house and literally just stay while they got on their feet in America to get away from, the continuing persecution in Europe even after the Holocaust. And his father owned a record store. And so he was brought up on a lot of like the classics and the new music of the time. We're talking late 30s, early 40s. And he listened to Schoenberg. He listened to the classics. He liked Schubert a lot, Mozart, Bach. He was also very fond of Bartok, which I think is really interesting, given how he thinks of music as, something that proceeds out of like a person rather than a movement, right? And Bartok was all about the folk music and things like that.
He went to U of C, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He not only that, he went to the University of Chicago starting at the age of 15.
Great.
Yeah, I know, right? He makes you feel so bad about yourself. He went to the University of Chicago at age 15, not for music. He went for philosophy and mathematics. He graduated very early. He actually did some of his first compositions then. There's actually some early serialistic pieces that he composed, which is wild, that are bouncing around from that time period. And then he went home, having gotten these 2 advanced degrees at the University of Chicago, and told his parents, actually, I think instead of stopping school, I want to go to Juilliard instead, which is which was apparently a bit of a head turn for them. He went to Juilliard. He got first exposed to like minimalism, Steve Reich, the pulsing sort of things. I should say before that in Chicago, he was exposed to jazz and rock music, which he was very interested in because of the energy of it, the sort of unpretentiousness of it in his eyes. And then he graduated Juilliard with flying colors, and he was like, that wasn't quite enough. I need to go across the ocean to France, where he studies with Nadia Boulanger.
Who didn't study with Nadia Boulanger?
Well, it's true. But the interesting thing about Philip Glass is that he didn't actually study as a composition student. He was just, he wasn't able to like join the composition program for various reasons. I think there was money problems. So he just like did like general music lessons with her. And he found out later that Nadia actually had a very high opinion of him. She actually wrote at some point, unbeknownst to him, that she thought that Philip would do something very important and very big in music one day. And she was absolutely right.
So that's where the French influence in his libretti and his writing comes from.
Yeah, sometimes literally. Some of his later operas he actually wrote in French, which is interesting. But there I think you can really hear it in the orchestration. There's a distinctive sort of smoothness in Philip Glass's orchestrations, whether it's with the electronics or with like woodwinds and brass. There's always something that feels very balanced about it, which I think is very much the French influence, particularly Nadia's influence, especially if you listen to the music of Nadia herself and her sister Lily, who I'm also a big fan of. But he keeps like picking up these pieces that will eventually become his signature style. But he still doesn't have his final piece yet. His final piece comes when he actually visits India and Nepal. Like a lot of people, back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was this interest in sort of like musical ideas coming out of India, especially. You even heard in pop music, like with the Beatles, because there's certain ways of composing that are not the same as in traditional Western classical music. Philip Glass likes to tell the story of how one of his jobs in India was to transcribe a piece of Indian classical music to Western classical instruments. And he was really, really struggling. He was just trying to like do it. And like there was a deadline and like he wasn't getting it. And the person he was working with was getting more and more frustrated with him. And eventually he's like, okay, why am I not getting this? And he realized something was wrong with the rhythm. So he erased the bar lines on his piece of music. And from there, it all came together. The additive rhythms of Indian classical music really started to make sense to him. Those 2x3 polyrhythms are a thing that happened a lot in Indian music, especially Indian classical music, I should say. And it was the final piece that like really clicked and really set him on his compositional journey.
He has basically 15 full-scale operas, but kind of there's like a core of 3 from which everything else came.
Exactly. So let's talk about the music. So early on, Philip Glass is associated with the minimalists like Steve Reich, which are very sort of like dun 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 dun. If you've heard anything by Terry Riley, for example, in C, or anything by Steve Reich, there's a pulse there. It's very tonal, which was very much a reaction against the really complicated Boulez Schoenberg stuff of the time. But at the same time, it wasn't really dramatic. Right? There's not a lot of happening there by design. It's minimalism, right? So Einstein takes on the idea of creating an opera with tools that aren't really meant for an opera. His first attempt is, of course, Einstein on the Beach, which is an amazing piece of music. It really is. And if you don't agree, because you've heard little chunks of it, I do not blame you. I was in the exact same boat when I first was like hearing about Einstein on the Beach. I would hear a bit of it. I would start listening to a section like, okay, this is interesting. The orchestration's interesting with the synthesizers and stuff. And then 2 minutes in, you get bored. You start like losing focus. You go away. So what I actually ended up doing was one day I literally made this decision. I was like, okay, every time I hear Philip Glass, there's elements I like. But I don't understand why he's so repetitive. I just don't get it. So I'm like, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to sit down and watch all the way through, start to finish, the entirety of Einstein on the Beach. And I highly recommend that for anyone who wants to learn how to listen to Philip Glass, because Einstein on the Beach does not have a story. It doesn't really have a libretto. There's spoken postmodern bits of poetry that don't really relate to anything that's going on. Everything that's sung is solfege or numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Einstein himself does appear in the opera, but he's not singing. He's playing the violin. He's just doing those arpeggios over and over again, just grinding away. And which is always fun because he's always wearing like a big Einstein wig and a little mustache. This is Philip Glass at his most minimal on his largest scale. Interestingly enough, when this opera came out in the late 70s, Philip Glass was living in New York City at the time. And they managed to rent out the Metropolitan Opera to do it, which is, wild. They rented out the opera and it's completely sold out every day it was performing. And Philip Glass at that point was financially in a position where you could literally hail a taxi to take you to the Metropolitan Opera playing Einstein on the Beach and have Philip Glass drive you there, which is great. And
I assume that this is the production that was directed by Robert Wilson.
Yes, of course. Right? This is the classic. We're going to hear a little bit of a clip from it in a second. This is from, I will say, a lot of people argue about whether or not Einstein on the Beach is a true opera. And so I wanted to have, and I had sort of the same reaction while I was listening to it. But the end is, I think, the most operatic. There's the most sense of something dramatic happening, leading you towards something. But at the same time, the repetition is extreme. And when you're listening to this part, this is the spaceship portion of the opera, really try to immerse yourself in it, not think about anything, try not to find meaning in it, but just listen to the little variations in the repetitions, how it changes over time, and what that does to you emotionally. So this is from the classic abridged recording from 1979.
Thank goodness that was abridged. Otherwise, this podcast would be 6 hours long. But I do think there's a lot of merit in immersing yourself in this piece, right?
Absolutely.
You do need to go all the way with this to kind of break into Philip Glass's head.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really interesting, because I think when you get into I think any person who listens to music, if they have something they like, they tend to listen to that a lot. And their brain starts to recognize the patterns in that style, in that genre, right? You have if you listen to nothing but, Mozart, you're going to start to hear things as incorrect if they don't have those Mozart, endings. If you jump even from Mozart to Wagner, it's a completely different world. And I find that Philip Glass, especially the early Philip Glass, at his most repetitive, really requires you to like rethink how you think about music and how you experience it and how you feel it. And that's something that's very exciting to me, because I don't think that happens very often when you've listened to a lot of music as I have. I mean, that's my only qualification for being on this podcast, honestly. And I think that there's something really, really neat about Einstein on the Beach particularly. And I will say, once you listen to all the way through Einstein on the Beach, every opera that comes after Einstein is so much easier to get into, because they all get better from here in terms of conventional sort of structure. But I will say, as you mentioned earlier, you called Einstein on the Beach the first part of a trilogy, which is accurate. These three operas, Einstein on the Beach, Satyagraha, and Akhenaten, are each members of the Portrait trilogy, as Philip Glass calls them. They're each not really narratives, but they're musicals, portraits of three important figures that represent some important aspect of human thought. Einstein on the Beach is obviously Einstein. The aspect of thought is science. The second one, Satyagraha, is about Gandhi primarily, although it also talks about Tolstoy, Martin Luther King. It's all the social justice aspects of society. And the third one, of course, is Akhenaten, and Akhenaten was known for being the first monotheist that we know about in history, and therefore is a very important figure in sort of the spiritual sort of side of humanity and thought.
Jump to Akhenaten for us first, because it's having its moment, pre-pandemic at the Met, and is presumably the most often performed opera in Egyptian.
Yeah, almost certainly. I mean, you could say the same thing about Einstein on the Beach is the most performed opera in solfege, but certainly Akhenaten is probably the most performed Egyptian opera. Not to skip over the Sanskrit in Satyagraha. I love Satyagraha, but I do think that we have to talk about Akhenaten, because it is the opera having its moment right now. And I think it's really cool to listen to Akhenaten compared to Einstein on the Beach, because it's almost night and day. You see a lot of the same elements. You see those arpeggios, you see the tonality, you see a lot of the same rhythms, you even see some of the same chord progressions, but everything is more structured. Everything is more dramatic. It feels like an opera in a way you don't think is really possible with the toolkit that Philip Glass is working with. And I think that's really interesting from an artistic standpoint, especially if you listen to, or watch rather, the Metropolitan Opera production from a couple years ago with friends of the show, Anthony Roth Costanzo and Zachary James. It was truly an impressive, it really was the most interesting piece of that year, I think, in terms of big name opera companies doing revivals of anything. And it's got a plot to it. It's in Egyptian, but it's got more conventional orchestration. But while Einstein on the Beach slowly develops from like a molecular level, from like a single chord for 20 minutes, Akhenaten finds those points in repetition and begins to anticipate how the audience is thinking about those. So he's able to like find those moments where in Einstein, whenever there was like a big change, you really feel it because you've been hearing the same thing for so long. In Akhenaten, Philip Glass starts to find those dramatic points of change and really start to play with them to like let the audience in. You start to feel like that sort of Wagnerian directional composition writing, where you really feel like he's leading to something and he can pull the rug out from under you, or he can give you what you want. And that is the essence of good dramatic music writing, at least in the operatic tradition, I think. And Akhenaten is just really amazing in that way. So let's hear a little bit of a clip this is from the Met production. I think you might hear a little bit of Zachary James. I'm not sure how I'm going to cut this yet. You'll definitely hear Anthony Roth Costanzo and future friend of the show, Janae Bridges. They will be singing the love duet between Nefertiti and Akhenaten.
I breathe the sweet breath which comes forth from thy mouth. I behold thy beauty every day. It is my desire that I may be rejuvenated with life through love of thee. Give me thy hands, holding thy spirit, that I may receive it and may live by it. Call thou upon my name unto eternity, and it shall never fail.
So, from Akhenaten, basically all of his other operas sort of come from there. If you listen to anything post Akhenaten, things start to make more sense. There's less dead languages being sung. You start to hear, but you hear him sort of branching out into different areas, using the tools that he learned from the trilogy of operatic writing. One of my first operas that I heard after I moved to Chicago was The Perfect American at Chicago Opera Theater. And there's something really, it's about Walt Disney. There's something really charming about that. There's something very, very relatable about this figure you've heard about your entire life, that still has this really deep sort of inner life and, all the external controversies surrounding Walt Disney put into an operatic form with these like strange sort of ritualistic elements of that Philip Glass sound. That's even reflected in the libretto too. The famous part that everyone mentions in Perfect American is the animatronic Abraham Lincoln talking to Philip Glass. And I will be glad to have you know that I briefly worked for Chicago Opera Theater. And to my knowledge, the giant Abraham Lincoln marionette still sits in the office. And it is terrifying if you're closing up the office and you forget about him, because he's just a giant Abraham Lincoln head staring at you from across the room. And I think there's something really funny about that and really unpretentious about that, which you can actually hear in Philip Glass's music. After the trilogy, he starts doing more operas in different styles. He, in addition to the 15 main operas, he starts doing chamber operas, especially. I believe, George, you did In the Penal Colony at one point in time.
Well, this is the thing, man, is that you keep teasing me that you're going to convert me to Philip Glass, but I love Philip Glass. No, I really dig Philip Glass.
I did it, folks.
And here's why. Is to me, there's a short leap between the Baroque and Philip Glass. To me, both those musical forms on the surface, you think they're going to drive you insane. And they're like a drug. Like, the more you listen
now
to them... Now
you've offended Oliver.
No, this is a compliment for Oliver. The more you want to listen to them, and the more of their intricacies and delicacies you start to hear. Mm-hmm. Look at In the Penal Colony, the libretto by Rudolf Wurlitzer, I think it is. 2 singers, 2 actors, string quintet. Just a brilliant show. I was lucky to direct that. Orphée, which is an adaptation of this bizarre French film. The music, it's like a drug, man. I AD'd on a production of that, and I have nothing but good things to say about Philip Glass.
That's great. Well, I'll take that as a victory, even if you had that opinion going in. And hopefully I've converted some of our listeners as well. To sort of close up and summarize, I want to say that Philip Glass is not this impenetrable wall of sound that you think he is. You might need to invest a little bit more time into like learning how it goes, but you have to do that with any composer that you're not used to, right? He's done opera, he's done pop albums, he's done symphonies, he's done film scores, he's done ballets, but he always manages to surprise me, at least, with what he's able to do dramatically with this toolkit of arpeggios and 2x3 polyrhythms, you know, and it really is a lot of fun. And I really hope that people out there who will have doubts, give him a chance. And the rest of you already know why Philip Glass is my inductee into the Hall of Fame. Let's close out really quick. This is just a great little example, one of Philip Glass's minor operas, that I think gives a good example of how different he can sound, especially when he's having fun and just composing what he wants, when he wants to, which is really what he's all about. This is an Italian opera for children, called The Witches of Venice. It was written in 2007, and it's to an Italian libretto. I believe it was commissioned for La Scala. And there's so much humor and fun in this music. It's got like this really sort of grouchy sounding synthesizer, and everyone's amplified. It's got like all these like bubbly swamp sound effects.
Oh, it's like
it's got
Oliver
witches.
on a good day.
There is an aria called The Ogre, but I won't play that for Oliver's sake. But this is a really great example of how he can adapt his distinctive style into a dramatic situation he is not associated with it, and just have fun. And so let's close out with that great Philip Glass classic from The Witches of Venice, Ghosts and Skeletons.
Philip Glass, the next inductee into the OBS HOF, the operaboxscore Hall of Fame. Thank you, Weston. Again, if you're watching on TDO, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You want to get that full show. Stitcher, Spotify, you click follow. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, just hit the plus sign. A little bit of sports talk. Before we get into the drill, the Super Bowl has been set. Surprising, certainly, in the AFC, the Cincinnati Bengals beating Tobias Wright, enemy of the show's team, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Serves him right.
Little place in my heart for the LA Rams. I'd like to see them go all the way. This is a Super Bowl that I might actually watch.
Oh.
I typically don't watch the Super Bowl. I don't find it that exciting. And it's, again, almost as long as a Philip Glass opera.
True.
2-minute drill. It's not that long, but it is right now.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Philip Land this week.
More on The Gods of the Game, the football opera. Phil Porter, the work's librettist, said, quote, "The opera imagines a world in which the world's greatest ever footballers, from Pele and Maradona through to Messi and Ronaldo, exist as gods watching over the global game," end quote. Also, more than 100 fans will be recruited to perform the opera's footy fan chorus, and I also just peed my pants.
I think in British that's footy fan chorus. But we'll move on from that. The Metropolitan Opera hopes that the Omicron cases that spiked over the past couple of months will be down and that ticket sales will be up when it returns from a planned month-long break. Attendance had dropped from 77% of the theater's capacity in mid-December to only 44% by mid-January, despite the Opera House never missing a performance during the spike.
The Renata Tebaldi Foundation Museum is set to celebrate the foundation's namesake soprano throughout the entirety of 2022, her centenary anniversary year. The legendary singer who died in 2005 will be celebrated in concerts, lectures, studies, and presentations under the name Tebaldi 100.
Hashtag Tebaldi 100.
The Bayerische Staatsoper has announced that it will increase its seating capacity from 25% to 50%, relaxing COVID measures imposed last month. Next door, the Dutch National Opera is set to reopen after new guidelines which allow venues to stay open until 10 p.m., also known as after Weston's bedtime.
So true. Conductor Zubin Mehta and his wife Nancy have donated $1 million in Tesla shares to the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino. Quote, "My wife and I hope our donation will be useful, and we both hope this will inspire others, Italians and foreigners, to donate to the Maggio, and the government to give the opportunity to deduct these sums from taxes, as happens in America." That's from Zubin Mehta in an event inaugurating the theater's new Zubin Mehta Hall, just like in America.
Anna Harvey has won the 2022 Paris Opera Competition. The English mezzo-soprano took home the Pierre Verne Prize, also known as first place, after interpretation of one of Sesto's arias from La Clemenza di Tito. Previous winners of the Paris competition include Julie Legeneva and Julie Fuchs, who was a part of this year's adjudication team.
The French just can't say first prize. The Royal Opera House has hired its first ever intimacy coordinator for its production of Handel's Theodora. Ita O'Brien will ensure that singers are comfortable during scenes involving violence and sex. Said O'Brien, quote, "There's consent each and every day. You might agree one day that you're very happy to kiss lip to lip, and then you develop a cold sore, so it's not suitable anymore."
In trade news, American soprano Matilda Edge has been named assistant professor of voice at Oberlin Conservatory. Edge is a member of the Ryan Opera Center Ensemble and served as a young artist with Santa Fe Opera way back in 2018.
San Francisco Opera has named Teresa von Klug as its first chief operating officer, partnering with General Director Matthew Shivlock. And Opera Liège has announced that Gianpaolo Bisanti is set to be the company's next music director. His tenure will kick off at the start of the 2022 season.
On the disabled list, Christina Mkhitaryan has canceled all her upcoming performances. The Russian soprano said, quote, "For family reasons, I have withdrawn from 4 of my upcoming engagements: Gilda in Frankfurt, Juliet in San Diego, Norina in Vienna, and Gilda in New York." And Sandra Radvanovsky has canceled all performances of the Grand Théâtre de Liceo's upcoming production of Queen of Spades.
Exit stage right, American tenor Randolph Locke has died at the age of 67. The Texan singer enjoyed a career at a number of important opera houses, including San Francisco Opera, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Sarasota Opera, and Chicago Opera Theater.
American Helden tenor William Cochran has died at 78. A recipient of the prestigious Lauritz Melchior Helden Tenor Award, he became associated primarily with Opera Frankfurt in the 70s and performed around the world in operas such as Lohengrin, Die Soldaten, Salome, and Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk.
Sounds like my spa playlist. American composer and scholar Michael White has died at the age of 90. He was a faculty member at Oberlin and served as chairman of the Music Theory and Composition Department of Juilliard until his death in January. His operas include The Metamorphosis, Through the Looking Glass, and Diary of a Madwoman.
English tenor, conductor, and teacher Nigel Rodgers has died at 86. An early music specialist, Rodgers recorded a number of works by Monteverdi and other early Baroque composers, as well as founding the ensemble Chiaroscuro in 1979.
And on this day, January 31st, in 1679, it was the first performance of Jean-Baptiste Lully's opera Bellerophon. Bellerophon at the Paris Opera. In 1727 is the first performance of Handel's Admetto at the Haymarket Theatre. In 1797, Franz Schubert was born in Vienna. In 1882, the widely recorded Australian bass baritone Peter Dawson was born. He made nearly 2,000 recordings. In 1910, it was the first opera broadcast live over the radio ever. The double bill of Pagliacci and Cavalleria Rusticana came from the Met. In 1921, it was the birth of actor tenor Mario Lanza in Philadelphia. And we say happy birthday once again to Philip Glass, born in 1937, British composer George Benjamin, born this day in 1960, and the American tenor Robert Gamble, born in 1955. Also in 1955, it was the debut of Renata Tebaldi at the Met in the role of Desdemona, hashtag Tebaldi 100. And a sad one, in 1994, the Gran Teatro del Liceo burnt down in Barcelona.
What a way to end it, but that is your 2-minute drill.
Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear of clouds unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire.
Just a little bit of Australian bass baritone Peter Dawson singing Jerusalem, which was recorded in 1926. I think he might have the record. If he's made nearly 2,000 recordings, he ousts Arlene Auger.
I wonder if that includes, like, because in early recordings, sometimes they would make you do, because they didn't have like the duplication technology in the very early days. So I wonder if that includes like every individual record. He made like 10 in a day, you know?
Yeah.
But man, what a wild career for recording in that era, especially. I love old recordings like that.
Handel's Admetto. So this is up in the ranks.
You don't want to do your
like,
thing about subscribe to the podcast, blah, blah, blah. This is
no,
where you
man,
normally...
the people, they know how to
The
see.
people know.
All right, so we're talking about Handel's Admetto. So
Admetto,
I wanted
so
to
this is as popular as Faramondo.
I just wanted to talk about Admetto, the first performance in 1727, because it had a noted scandal. There were two factions in the audience, one for prima donna Fausta Bordoni and one for Francesca Cuzzoni. And the performances were disrupted by, hisses and catcalls. But it is not as bad as the story of them getting into a literal catfight on the stage, ripping each other's costumes. They had to stop the opera.
Oh my God.
So this is making us think that maybe we need to do a, TKO battle between Cuzzoni and Bordoni one of these days.
Wow.
The original rivals.
That's like WrestleMania
rival divas.
grand finale type of stuff.
Exactly.
Whoa. Thanks.
I love that.
So that's coming soon. We're teasing that one day. Cuzzoni versus Bordoni.
On pay-per-view.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know what? People just might fall for it. So Zubin Mehta, okay, shares in Tesla. Weston, I'm not a numbers guy. Talk me through this.
Okay, so Zubin Mehta and his wife, they just had this lovely new hall named after them. After Zubin Mehta, I suppose. And they wanted to give a donation, which makes sense. It's just wild to me that they chose to give them $1 million in Tesla shares specifically. I did not peg Zubin Mehta for an Elon Musk fanboy, but I guess I was wrong. Or maybe they're not fanboys. Maybe they saw the videos of the Hyperloop and were like, we need to get rid of as many shares of this as possible. It's going down, baby. It's the funniest thing. I mean, I literally... In rehearsal, when I was reading we do rehearse to all of our fans out there who think we just mess up because it's the first time we do it. No, we practice. We still mess up. I couldn't get through his quotes because it really does feel like some sort of tax scam in order to do the donations that way. But, I suppose I think it'll be helpful. I don't think that, Tesla is going to go up and down for a while, but I hope that it the money goes to the right places where it needs to be.
I'm looking for some of these big donations to start coming in Bitcoin and non-fungible tokens.
Well, cryptocurrency just crashed like today, so
Yeah.
you're not paying attention to the news. So I don't know about what Tesla's value will be, 100 years from now. But I hope that they cash out soon and they get all of the money that's coming to them.
There's a great YouTube video, my YouTuber named Folding Ideas, which really breaks down the problems with NFTs and cryptocurrency. It just came out. It went viral a couple days ago, and I would recommend Zubin Mehta, if you're listening, just check on that, because I feel like you might need to get that takedown.
I want to see Philip Glass's opera on NFTs.
Another quick hit before we go to the next topic. Matilda Edge being named as a adjunct professor or associate professor, I forget what the title is, at Oberlin.
Associate, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Oberlin is a major conservatory, so congratulations to her. You had a little joke about her being a young artist as long ago as 2018, and in a way, she is like achieving the dream at the start of her career. I mean, all of us who were chasing after singing careers wanted to like have like a performance career and then have some cushy university job that they could like settle into, and where they could be centrally located, etc. I mean, like, she's not tenured yet.
Located, dude. Okay, look,
well, I mean,
she has to live in
where she
Oberlin,
could have
Ohio.
A home, Okay. Well, anyway, the point being is that she's still, Mike, I would consider her still be like a rising artist, but to already have that secured is pretty impressive.
I mean, it's centrally located because it's in the center of Ohio.
I mean, it's about as Midwest as you can get.
Anyway, I'm going to try to get Matilda on the show so we could talk about it soon.
I that would be awesome. I just hate Ohio for reasons that all the other Wolverine fans out there will know. Huge fan of Katie Mitchell. Katie Mitchell, of course, the British director. She's directing Handel's Theodora at the Royal Opera House. This production has already been in the news a few weeks ago when the Royal Opera House sent to its ticket holders a warning saying that, I believe it was children under 16 were either not going to be admitted or had to be admitted with a parent or guardian. So essentially saying, like, this opera is rated R. And there was a kerfuffle in the press about censorship, which obviously that makes no sense because no one has a problem with R ratings on films. What it does tell us, though, that like this is going to be a explicit, although perhaps not unjustified, production. And kudos to the Royal Opera House for getting their act together and hiring, for the first time ever, an intimacy coach. Intimacy coordinator is the phrase perhaps they use in England. It's a thing, okay? Intimacy coordinators are now a thing. And the reason for that, and they're valued members of production teams, is that up to this point, is that the insensitivities and the uncomfortableness was simply whitewashed over by a whole bunch of other, typically straight men in powers of position in these opera houses that it did not bother.
Absolutely.
And finally, we are taking the sponge to the glass, and we are finally starting to clean this up. And I find it surprising that the Royal Opera House actually took this long to get to this point, right? This has been happening in the U.S. for probably not 10 years, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say at least 5 years. And yes, I really want to see this production.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of those, because obviously intimacy directors, intimacy coordinators have existed for a while. But I didn't start noticing them in sort of the mainstream until sort of the Me Too movement started happening, when you started to have a lot of, people in the industry, both in theater and in opera, start to, you realize that sometimes the people in charge of those scenes should not be in charge of anything specifically sexual. But in this case, the violence too, I think is it's imperative, because you have to remember that actors, singers, they're doing a job, it's a very strange job where you might be asked to kiss your colleague every once in a while, but it's imperative that you feel safe doing it. And I love the quote that she used, because it's not just, safety in terms of like, I feel, I'm not sure if I'm psychologically ready for this, but also like just having someone to stand up for you and say like, hey, I was just sick. I don't want to give my co-star a cold sore just for a kiss. Is there another way we can do this? Having someone who is an intermediary between the director and the cast to make sure that both are getting enough of what they want, and using that as a creative challenge in order to create the best piece of art possible, a more democratic piece of art, is really, really exciting. And every time I hear about a new program, I hope eventually they hire on a permanent intimacy coordinator, because I think that'd be amazing.
It should be a permanent staff position at an opera house of that size.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
caliber. Certainly in this country, it is more of a case-by-case basis, but there's training in that field. There is accreditation. Yes. In that field, and it is absolutely a thing to be supported. Before we wrap up the reel, let's just get into the numbers really quickly, crunch the numbers here on the Met ticket sales. So first of all, they are in a intentional pause right now. This is something that was planned.
Yeah, they didn't know what their season was going to be like, but for the first time, they're just going dark for the month of February.
Well, obviously they got it right. I mean,
it was a good idea.
Opera houses and theater companies across the country are saying we're not performing until March.
Yeah, it's been interesting how in the U.S. we have been able to carry on and not really cancel stuff. And I think that just goes to show how invested companies are in making sure that the show goes on, because there's so much money at stake. Whereas in places like the Netherlands or Germany, whatever, it's like, well,
more of a
wasn't
cushion.
our money to begin with.
That's absolutely right. I think it also shows the strength of those governments in Europe and their response to the pandemic to say, tough, we're just going to make these policies and shut it down.
True.
To great outcry from those artists who want to create. I get that. I'm not going to push that to one side. Mm-hmm. But here we are, 44% of Lincoln Center filled in the month of January.
Of the Metropolitan Opera House, not Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center is a very big place.
It's true. It's a whole quadrangle of spaces, but I use it as a shorthand for the Met. 44%. If you've been in that house, you can imagine how empty that would be.
It would feel very empty in that huge house. I mean, I really hope this works out for them. I hope they can come back safely with more ticket holders coming in. I know I personally have held off on getting some tickets for things over the past month because of the Omicron spike, but things seem to be starting to settle, maybe. I think by March we're going to be a little bit more confident about going. And I think that the Met made the best call. They looked at the data, they looked at, the spikes last winter, and were like, we're just not going to deal with that. We'll see what happens, and it seems to be working out for them so far.
They made their best call. We're going to make our good calls and our bad calls as we wrap up the show.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Thanks for hanging out with us wherever you are and however you're listening. Good call, bad call is going to take you home tonight. We're going to kick it off with our creative consultant, Oliver Camacho.
I just wanted to shout out to baritone Justin Austin, who is a singer that I didn't know about, but friend of the show, Will Liverman, introduced me to his singing. And he is making his debut singing Intimate Apparel, the Ricky and Gordon show. He's been getting great reviews, actually, so far. And he was just profiled in Opera News magazine. So good on him. So keep your eye out for baritone Justin Austin.
Weston Williams.
Well, I want to do a little hashtag TBT, not to be confused with hashtag Tibaldi100. Hashtag TBT to Philip Glass retweeting that lovely video of the video game character Toad with long legs dancing to his music. Philip Glass, his official account, literally retweeted that about a year and a half ago, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since.
I've been spending a lot of time thinking and reading about improv comedy. And if you're here in Chicago, you might know the improvisers Fuzzy and Erica. They have done more improv shows than I have had hot dinners. And I had a chance to have dinner with them the other night and to talk about improv and what makes improv great and how to read about it and think about it and what a night it was. And there were no audience suggestions, which was the only strange thing about it. Hey, that's it.
You're really trying to widen the net of opera box score, George. Good job.
Improv opera is next on the list.
Yeah.
That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer, he's Norm Waddell, normwaddell.com. On Facebook, you search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, it's at Opera Box Score. Help us deepen that bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Again, if you're watching on TDO, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You just smash the plus sign. Email us those hot takes. Send us that voice memo, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Get that OBS beer coaster, the OBS lapel pin. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you get in the queue to be considered for the Footy Fan Chorus. We're back with an all-new show next week. We get you ready for the Super Bowl with national anthem singer Scott Ramsey. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more charitable deductions. Join us.